another fundamental thing I believe is that consumers really cannot tell you what they need or want. They can tell you what they're dissatisfied with. They can tell you what they don't want. But it's very difficult for them to tell you what they need and want. We would have never gotten to a product like Febreze waiting for the consumer to say they wanted Febreze. We would have never gotten to Swiffer. We would have never gotten to almost all of the new products that I ever worked on if we waited for the consumer to tell us that she or he needed them. And then the second thing I believe is it's kind of like anthropology. You learn a lot by, sitting in the woods and observing, right? Watching what people do.
Hello, and welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodling. In these conversations, we'll speak with many of the world's leading experts on the mistakes, methods, and mindsets that help them become the people they are today. We hope that their hard-earned insights help accelerate you on your journey. Today's conversation is with AG Lafley. AG Lafley is the former CEO of Procter & Gamble, one of America's greatest and largest companies, and he's also the author of 2 best-selling books, Playing to Win: How Strategy Really Works, and Game Changer. In today's conversation, we'll talk about how AG's experience at P&G guided his perception and ideas on strategy, on how to create innovative cultures, and how to encourage high performance across an organization. AG Lafley, welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership.
Great to be here.
Wonderful. I'm very excited for today's conversation. So you have had an incredibly impressive career spanning multiple decades now, and I want to start actually all the way back at the beginning and ask you about your time in the military. So you were a Navy supply officer for 5 years before you went to Harvard Business School and then ultimately joined Procter & Gamble. How did that foundational professional experience shape the person and the leader that you became?
Yeah, actually 2 years Naval Security Group, 3+ years Navy Supply Corps. Navy Supply Corps was my first introduction to business. So I went to an undergraduate school, Hamilton College, that was strictly liberal arts. I changed my major every year, mathematics, then English Lit. Then I spent a year in France. Then I came back and took every history course I could possibly take to ensure I'd graduate in 4 years. But I hadn't had a stick of business experience beyond working to make some money, loading freight cars, punching a punch press, hitting a riveting machine. So it was my first introduction to business. I ran retail and service operations for pretty good size air base in Japan during the Vietnam conflict. And I learned a lot. It was a lot of fun.
After you went to Harvard Business School, you then joined Procter & Gamble, and you were there for 23 years before ultimately becoming CEO. At FranklinCovey, our CEO, Paul Walker, was here for 20 some odd years before becoming CEO and kind of moving up through the ranks. How do you feel like that tenure inside of P&G helped you as CEO, and how did it hurt you or hold you back when you became CEO?
I think it was mostly help. The way P&G works, maybe Google works, is every 3 years to 5 years, they're asking you to take on another assignment. And that was the case for me. So every one of those assignments was offered to me actually before I felt like I'd mastered and fully delivered on the one I was working on. So they keep you on a development and growth trajectory. I think I benefited from 3 things. One, I spent a long enough time in a core business, the fabric and home care business. So I really understood how to build a business from the ground up and how to manage a mature business, which is sometimes more difficult, right? There are 3 kinds of businesses: keep it up, mature businesses, start them up, entrepreneurial businesses, and fix them up, private capital businesses. And I spent a long time in a keep it up business, and it's hard to keep it up. And I learned how to do it. And I think that was important. And then the other great gift I got was I was sent to Asia for 5 years when Asia was clearly a formative part of the world for, frankly, all of the Western companies, whether they were in Europe or in North America. And that was a gift. And then lastly, before I got the CEO job, I was given the biggest region in the company, which was North America. That was a very operational job. And I was given trying to figure out whether we wanted to get into the beauty and personal care business in a really serious way. So, a great combination. Test your strategic skills, test your leadership and management skills, learn how to work with very different organizations.
Yeah, so you really saw it all with P&G before you ultimately became CEO. I love that framework of the three types of businesses: fix it up, keep it up, and start it up. I think fix it up and start it up are probably ones that are maybe more self-explanatory what the keys to success are. But talk to me about a keep it up business. What's the key to being a successful leader of a keep it up business?
I think that's a super important question, and I've thought about it a lot. I've worked on a number of keep it up businesses, even though since I left P&G, I'm working more on start 'em up and fix 'em up businesses. The key to a keep it up business is that you have to think about it as an eternal restarted up business, and you have to be good at fixing it up when the ship springs leaks. Okay, and inevitably in keep it up businesses, there are going to be competitors who are trying to work their way, past over your moat, right, and into your castle. And if you're in an attractive industry, that's just going to go on, right? So you got to get very good at competitive strategy, competitive tactics, and all of that. And then I believe successful keep it up businesses, at least in my case, were the innovation leaders in the industries and categories that they chose to compete in. So we were keeping up what we had created, what we had invented, what we had innovated, and what was growing. And we were always trying to start up, the next product category that was adjacent to the product category we were in, the next improved product, the next technology that would have an impact on the industry or category that we were in. So it's sort of an ambidextrous job, right? You've got to be able to do a bit of all three.
I like that idea. The keep it up business is actually the core is you don't want to rest in your laurels, and you need to think about it proportionally as a fix it up sometimes and a start it up sometimes, and sometimes both of those at the same time, looking at different divisions or dimensions of the business.
Yeah. A lot of too many companies look at the core as a cash cow and a steady feeder of talent into the rest of the organization. And frankly, they get complacent. And I always believe that if you couldn't grow from the core, if you couldn't grow organically in the core and from the core, you just weren't doing your job in a keep it up business.
Yeah. You referenced your time in China and kind of moving to China at a point where China was becoming ascendant. I read an amazing story about your time in China that in order to really understand the customer, you weren't willing just to read, secondary research, but you actually went into the homes of customers and you observed how they interacted with P&G products, which I just love that level of customer obsession. So I'm wondering, first off, is that story true, or is that like a apocryphal memory that's gotten shared out? And then secondly, what else did you do to be customer obsessed? I think customer obsession is something that just so obviously runs as a line through your entire career and all of your writing. What's something practical that you can guide people towards to be customer obsessed?
Yeah, I'm obviously a big believer in, something Peter Drucker said a long time ago, which is the only purpose of a business is to create a customer, serve that customer better, and ideally, if you can, keep that customer for life. No, it's true, especially in developing markets, in emerging markets. I began every visit by either going into stores and doing shop-alongs, which we talked about earlier that you did a few in the U.S., doing shop-alongs, then going into homes. And I really wanted to have a chance to observe, our customers actually using the products. I didn't want to listen to them tell me about how they used the products or how the products performed. I wanted to be there when they were doing their laundry. It's a famous story that I actually did sit on a riverbank in rural China. I actually did take my shoes off. Actually did put my feet in the water, and through an interpreter, I talked to an older woman, the senior woman in the household, multi-generational household, who was doing the laundry in the river. And I've I've sat in makeup sessions. I've sat in skincare sessions. I've done baby diaper changes. I've done pretty much any personal care product that I don't have to put the customer or me in an embarrassing situation. I've been involved in. I've tried our adult incontinent products to make sure they really worked. So yeah, I am
I'm not going to ask
customer
a follow up about that
obsessed.
one. Don't worry.
It worked. Um, but I am obsessed because another fundamental thing I believe is that consumers really cannot tell you what they need or want. They can tell you what they're dissatisfied with. They can tell you what they don't want. But it's very difficult for them to tell you what they need and want. We would have never gotten to a product like Febreze waiting for the consumer to say they wanted Febreze. We would have never gotten to Swiffer. We would have never gotten to almost all of the new products that I ever worked on if we waited for the consumer to tell us that she or he needed them. And then the second thing I believe is it's kind of like anthropology. You learn a lot by, sitting in the woods and observing, right? Watching what people do, not listening to what they say, but observing and watching what they do.
Yeah. So I want to move on from your experience as CEO to some of your amazing writing, which obviously is drawing on your incredible experience. So you wrote a seminal strategy book back in 2013, Playing to Win, How Strategy Really Works. And in that book, you highlighted kind of 5 phases of strategic decision making. Winning aspiration, where to play, how to win, capabilities, and management systems. This was drawn from your experience at P&G, where you tripled market cap, or more than tripled market cap in your 10 years as CEO. Which of those 5 phases do you credit as the most impactful on creating shareholder value at P&G?
That's a tough question, and I'm not sure that it's answerable because one of our strong points of view, Rogers and mine, is that these 5 questions, right? These 5 choices, and that's what they are most importantly, choices. These 5 choices all need to be coordinated, they need to be integrated, and they need to be working together. So it's sort of like a strategy for a basketball team. There isn't one thing that you're going to do to win that game, right? So I do think they all fit together. I do think that when they do fit together, when they are coordinated, when they're all working well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a multiplier. It's not just additional, right? So, yeah, that would be my answer to that one. There's not one magic bullet.
Yeah, so let's now talk through a couple of them a little bit more specifically. In Where to Play, you talk about the importance of saying what business are we in and what business are we not in. And one of the examples that you give in the book is around Procter & Gamble moving out, selling Pringles and divesting from. Pringles is an iconic brand. I bet 80% of Americans know when you pop, you can't stop. So tell me about the decision to move to divest, and then what business you did want to be in.
Yeah, super important point. First, you need to decide which businesses you're going to abandon, which businesses you're going to exit. And we exited a number of businesses in the first decade. And when I left the second time, we exited 8 out of 18 industries and businesses, 100 out of 150 brands. And it really helped us focus on those areas where we could play and had the highest probability to win with our capabilities and our systems. So coming back to the Pringles question, it was the last of the food and beverage businesses that we did exit. We'd made a decision way back in the early 2000s that packaged food and beverages were not either a strategic or a particularly attractive set of categories and industries for us for a whole bunch of reasons. Customers were moving to more natural foods. Grocery stores were increasing their private label offerings and own label offerings and attacking all of the manufacturers' private label packaged food products. And frankly, it wasn't a category or an industry that was driven by real innovation. It was driven by recipe making, right? Not by step change innovation that somebody couldn't follow quickly. Pringles was an interesting one because we did have a pretty strong, albeit number two for sure, well behind Frito-Lay, position in the snacks, salted snacks category. It was a unique brand. We had a lot of unique pieces and parts, but it became an orphan. And from a distribution standpoint, we had never gone to direct store distribution. We had always tried to distribute Pringles through the warehouse, and it was quite clear that if you were in any of the snacks businesses, which tend to be, often things that you grab and go, you don't think about, they're not on your planned shopping list. It really made a difference if you could be in the store with direct store delivery. And we tried a couple of partnerships. We even reached out to Pepsi and were willing to take on the DOJ and the FTC if we thought we could put the businesses together. You may recall that Coca-Cola actually signed a deal where they were going to buy the Pringles brand. They were going to buy Sunny Delight, Hawaiian Punch. I can't remember a few of our coffee, smaller coffee brands, and they decided at the last minute that they didn't want to go ahead on that deal, although that would have been a better fit, right, than sticking with us. An orphan with us was not the best outcome. And so they ended up with Kellogg's. I haven't checked lately, but Kellogg seems to be selling the brand. It seems to be doing pretty okay.
Great strategy only matters if you can execute. FranklinCovey's guide, The Agility Advantage, helps leaders refocus priorities, engage teams, measure progress, and pivot as conditions evolve. Grab your free copy from the show notes and help your teams respond with agility to propel performance. So you said that you cut from 150, I think in your second tenure as CEO when you came back, you cut from 150, you cut 100 of those brands.
That's correct.
Which is amazing focus. I have always experienced inside of companies and multiple different companies now that there are small laggard products, services, business lines that you can rationalize to yourself of, oh, well, it's basically self-sufficient and it's free money at this point. Why would we cut it? I'm sure that you had similar arguments internally for some of those 100 brands. So how did you develop the internal commitment, buy-in, the courage to cut things that might have felt like, oh, they're just easy cash cows?
Yeah. Excellent question. And that challenge will be with us forever, especially in large multi-industry, right? Multi-business companies, multi-regional companies too, right? If you're multi-business and multi-regional, multinational, it's even harder, right? Because France has a good business, but the rest of the world doesn't. France wants to hold on to the business, till the end of time, right? I would say the first most important decision we made was we did an open inside and outside assessment of all 18 of the categories that we were in. We assessed them not only strategically, but a hard-nosed assessment on how they had been performing, how they were currently performing, and how they were likely to perform in the scenarios we saw facing the business going ahead. And I would say 7 out of 8, 8 out of 10 of the decisions were pretty straightforward. But the key point is we gave everybody a chance to input. I held the recommendation. The board ultimately made the decision, and I recommended that we exit 8. We kept 1 or 2 that were on the fence, and that ended up being a board decision. I personally would have exited 1 of the 2, and I would have kept. So they kept 1 that I would have exited. Fair process, right? That business had a good case for why we should stay in. The board agreed. They went forward. And frankly, knock on wood, it's been doing pretty well. So it looks like a good decision. Third thing is there are always these fringy brands, and the trap is, yes, they're generating revenue. Often they're generating cash without too much effort, right? They're showing up in your margin mix, usually positively. But here's the thing. they're not going to develop and grow further. They're usually fairly nichey. They usually have declining user bases. And even though the resources are relatively modest, those resources are taken away from good development and growth opportunities elsewhere. And last but not least, they're a distraction. Every time you do, every time you do an operating review, every time you do a strategy review, every time you do an innovation review, they come up and the answer is, we really aren't paying much attention to them because you know what? They're cash cows and we're milking those businesses.
What percent of your revenue is tied up in those 8 categories you left, those 100 brands that you left? And how
Yeah,
did you convince shareholders, we're giving up on a bunch of revenue?
that's a matter of public record and you'll get a more accurate answer, but I'm going to say it was about 15% of revenue, 15 to 20% of revenue, but it was less than 5% of real profits, meaning, value creation, right? So it wasn't that hard to let it go. And it freed up a lot of resource, right? Because you had more staff against those, those businesses that are on the ends of the bell curve.
Absolutely, yeah. You're able to put more wood behind fewer arrows. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So the fifth and final of the kind of 5 choices in the book is about management systems. And here at FranklinCovey, we work with companies on strategy, but really are execution experts. We have 4 disciplines of execution where we help companies define their wildly important goal and then set lead and lag measures to get leverage towards it. So I'm really happy in a strategy book that you talk about execution because I feel like that's often what is missing in strategy books. So talk to me about the importance of management systems and what great management systems look like for companies.
Yeah. Super important question because it's the choice that people don't want to have to deal with. Most companies have way more systems than they need, and they have way more systems than they even know they have because they're all in a company. What were we, 160 years old? You can imagine the number of legacy systems we had lying around, and we're on the ground in 80 countries, and we're selling into 150 to 160. I mean, we had legacy systems piled up all over the place. So even when we put in, a new Oracle system or whatever, it was a big improvement. We had one system that worked worldwide, but, rooting out, getting rid of the legacy systems was always a challenge. So I think the short answer to your question is we tried to pick a few that we felt were going to give us competitive advantage and going to enable us to translate strategic choices into well-coordinated operations and excellent execution, consistently excellent execution. So from the top, we totally redid the way we did goal setting and strategy reviews, throughout the binders, throughout the 50 to 100 slide PowerPoint presentations, netted it down to, if your business is performing well, why? Which strategic choice is really carrying you? If your business is struggling, what's wrong? And what are the 1 or 2 key issues we have to address? And then we'd work really hard to define the problem or describe the opportunity, because a well-defined problem is half solved. A well-described opportunity is half seized. So it started there. We did the same thing, sharpening our innovation and technology reviews, which came right after our strategy reviews, because innovation was our lifeblood. It was a strategic choice we made. It was how we were going to win in the industries and categories and regions we chose to compete in. And we kind of stepped it down to operating reviews. Again, leaner, more focused. And then our values when I was at P&G were integrity and trust, ownership, and leadership. And we put very simple systems in place. We didn't have a lot of policies, right? We had do the right thing, and we had guiding principles. And frankly, we entrusted the leaders who were in the countries, at the customers, in the categories and subcategories to do the right thing with a clear understanding of the goals, a clear understanding of the choices, and a clear understanding of the systems we use to introduce a new product, to do inventory, to manage our cash, whatever it was. But we liked standard, we liked simple, we liked easy to use, and we wanted them to be so easy to use that the managers and the leaders could use the systems, and we wouldn't have to have this layer of functions sitting beside them or under them, to make the whole system work.
You mentioned throughout that answer of kind of the management systems and bringing these strategy throughout the organization, you mentioned middle management multiple times.
Yes.
Kind of getting managers and leaders on the bus and moving forward. Do you think this book is as relevant to middle management as it is to executive level?
I do. Playing to win, I do. I mean, we reduced the number of layers. I mean, I think we were, for a company our size and complexity, we had 5 layers, from general manager to joining the company. And, it was getting people on the bus in terms of, you had to buy into our culture. You had to buy into our purpose, improving the lives of the world's consumers with everyday household personal care products. You had to buy into our guiding principles, and you had to buy into our goals, right? And you had to be committed to play your position, do your job, and make the team better. But we delegated a lot of the so-called strategic and tactical decisions at ground level to the people that were there. I wasn't going to sit in Cincinnati and try to make a decision for the young man or woman that was running our Vietnam business, or worse, the young sales manager that was running our leading customer in Vietnam. They were on the ground. They saw it every day. They were in touch with the customers. They were in touch with the consumers. It was their job to make those decisions, and then we'd look at the outcomes together. And if we were doing well, we'd repeat. Okay, if we weren't doing well, we'd sit back, we'd analyze what wasn't working, and we'd make changes. But we expected our team members, our players at all levels to make the decisions that they needed to make. I mean, for sure at the big customers in the U.S., right? If you were on the Walmart team, you made the decisions for the Walmart team. If you were on the Publix team or the Kroger team, whatever, you made those decisions. The Amazon team.
So far, we've spoken primarily about your first book on strategy. You also wrote a book with Ram Charan, who actually FranklinCovey collaborated with on What the CEO Wants You to Know and a great solution on business acumen. You wrote a book called The Game Changer, really around innovation. And in it, you talk about the connect and develop model. That's one of the examples you give. So maybe if you could tell our listeners, what is connect and develop, and how did you approach innovation at P&G? You spoke earlier about innovation was the lifeblood of the organization.
Yeah. First, the innovation piece. From the beginning, every product, whether it was soap originally or the first laundry detergent that was made from synthetics, not from soap, or whether it was the first disposable baby diaper, we're clearly a company that built its line of products and entered categories based on inventions, right? So we believe in invention. P&G's won the President's Medal for innovation and technology. I don't think there's any other consumer products company that's done that. And we're not thought of as an innovation and technology company, but I haven't checked recently. When we were there, we were consistently in the top 10 in terms of patents. So, we were inventing, and we were inventing to make the consumer's life a bit better. In terms of connect and develop, in the technology world, it would be called open sourcing, but it was really a little bit more. And our learning was that while we were inventive, we weren't really all that more we couldn't possibly invent all the new materials, all the new processes, all the new products that we would need to achieve our growth aspirations and goals. Okay. So we wanted a way to connect to the guys and girls in the garages, the researchers in university and other laboratory research centers, you know, the Rube Goldbergs that were, you know, working, tinkering with innovation, the Thomas Edisons that were tinkering with innovations, you know, with a couple of other guys. We wanted a way to say, hey, we're open. Our doors are open to any and all innovations or inventions that you think might be relevant and important for our consumers or applicable, relevant to one of our categories of business or industries. And the results were amazing. I mean, we went from collaborating, well, first of all, in our industry, in the industry of everyday consumer products, only about 15% of all new products ever succeed. 85% fail. It's an incredibly high failure rate, right? So we wanted to get that success rate up, right? And we also wanted to get the products that did succeed to become bigger. Instead of a $20 million business, a $50 or $100 million business. Instead of a $50 or $100 million business, a $500 million or $1 billion business. And it, you know, I started counting billion-dollar businesses, and we started with 10 and we ended up with 25. And it was, you know, it was kind of it was a funny goal. It wasn't really a hard goal, but the organization got really motivated by that, right? Because it meant we were serving more customers, which fulfilled our purpose. But when we really got it going, half or 60% of all the new product improvements and new products we were bringing to the market had one or more outside connectors that helped us develop. And that was amazing, right? And some of them came in through our supply chain. Some of them came in from places unknown that we had never worked with before. And when it was going well, I think it was a tremendous accelerator and tremendous, just multiplier to our innovation pipeline. The insect repellent product that they introduced a few years ago, Zevo, that was a connect and develop project.
On the day that we're recording this, we actually are releasing a new solution here at FranklinCovey called Disrupt to Win. Disrupt Everything, Innovate to Win.
Yes.
And it's really focusing on the importance of getting the mindset past the status quo bias. And that, yes, you can have innovation strategy that comes top down, but you need every employee inside of an organization to embrace this mindset. How did you do that? It's one thing to say we're going to do develop and connect. Yep. We're going to go connect and develop. Yep. We're going to go top down. How do you actually get rank and file to embrace, there's the not invented here bias. People don't want outside ideas often.
Yeah. Another really good question. I'm glad you're working on disrupt and innovate. I'm a big believer in constructive disruption, right? Instead of waiting for destructive disruption coming at you from the outside, right? That you didn't anticipate, you didn't see coming. You're always better off challenging, right? Challenging the sacred cows, challenging the assumptions, challenging businesses that look like they're doing really well. What do we need to do to keep them going, right? So I'm a big believer in disruption. I think I think the key is constructive, and I think the key is no, you're not an outlier, you're not a renegade, you're not kicked off the island if you're challenging and disrupting. You're exactly the kind of player we need on our team. Okay, that's an important point. Culturally, it has to be okay to disrupt, right? And then in terms of getting everybody involved, we've tried all kinds of things. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing now. I know one thing that I've contributed to, which I'll come back to in a minute, which is the Game Changer Awards. But we tried innovation fairs. We tried, when I was in Japan, I would have a session every quarter, and everybody in the Japanese organization was invited to these sessions. And the Japanese have a very interesting culture. They're not going to speak up and speak out, right? The nail that sticks out gets hammered down. So I would give them all an index card, and they would write their ideas on the index card. They didn't have to sign them, and they would put them on their chair when they left. And I'm not kidding you, knock on wood, some of the best ideas we got, we finally figured it out, without, you could sign your name if you wanted, but it was coming from an accountant in the accounting and finance department who was really interested in this. And ironically, she moved out of finance. She moved into sales. She ended up on the Walmart team. We discovered her and she discovered us, right? Coming back to the Game Changer Award, I took the proceeds from the Game Changer book, all of them, and I added P&G stock, and I created an endowment. And that endowment is there for the CEO and the head of R&D every year to make awards to individuals and teams whose contributions created a new innovation that has to have gone to market and had at least some early success. So it has to have been commercialized. That reflects all of the ways you can innovate individually and as a team. And I'm proud to say that for now, I don't know, maybe the fifth year in a row, and the end of January, they make those awards internally. And the joy I have is I get to write those kids and those guys and gals a note and encourage them to compete for the next one.
I love it. That's wonderful. So what is next for you? You've had this storied career. You've written these best-selling books. What's next on your plate?
Well, the first thing I should tell you is what's not next. I'm not headed to the golf course. I'm with Mark Twain. Golf is a good walk ruined. There's some beautiful golf courses and some beautiful locations, but it's not my thing. I stay active, but I have to do things that take about an hour. Tennis, go for a bike ride, hit the gym, that kind of stuff. But no, next for me has been three things. I've been involved in venture, and I'm actively involved in about three companies at a time. I don't want to do more than that. I happen to be on one board of one startup. I don't really love being on boards. I'd rather work with the CEO and her or his team. Startups are very challenging. Most of them fail. Their failure rate's even higher than consumer products, consumer household and personal products. But I enjoy it. It's fun, right? It's inherently innovation and strategy at the beginning. I do some private equity and some private capital, although less than I did. Between my two assignments at P&G, I worked for Clayton, Dubilier and Rice in New York. I was their special advisor alongside Jack Welch, which was a real treat. I mean, Jack was, maybe the consummate CEO operating manager, and we sat next to each other and tore into strategies and operating plans and tried to help the teams improve the performance of their businesses and turn them around in 3-5. That was definitely fix it up businesses, right? So turnarounds in 3, 5, or 7 years. And then I have some nonprofit passions. I'm involved in conserving, environmentally restoring, and transforming 53 acres on Sarasota Bay here into signature public park. We've already opened up the first dozen acres. We won a bunch of design awards, even on the national level, and we'll welcome our 1 millionth visitor in 3 years, which is extraordinary for a city of 56,000 and a county of about 500,000. Yeah. And I'm involved in a little project to see if we can reframe and recreate a liberal arts education to get it, to get all these kids to learn the digital language, right? The language you need to know today is not French or Spanish or German or, God forbid, Latin like I learned. You need to be digitally fluent, right? So we're working on a number of things there, not just in the classroom, but a lot of internships, experiential, all that. So that's kind of the stuff I'm doing. A couple of 2 or 3 nonprofit causes, a couple of private equity that I'm still involved in, and then the venture ones. And for me, that's fun.
That sounds
It's my next chapter, and it's fun.
Sounds like a great portfolio, and I understand why you don't have time for a 4-hour round of golf. So our final question to close on that we ask every guest. FranklinCovey is a leadership company. Who is a leader who has greatly influenced you, and what lesson can we all learn from them?
Okay, I'm going to say this, and it's true, and it's you, but Stephen Covey is definitely in the top 5. I was in the first experience he brought to P&G. John Pepper was the then chairman. Dirk Jager was either COO or had just become CEO. And I think Stephen was a little worried about whether the inoculation was going to take. It was full of, you can imagine, right? It was full of the CEOs of the businesses and the curmudgeonly, heads of the functions, the CFO, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for some reason, I'm trying to think of what I was doing. I might have been leading Asia at the time. They might have brought me in for that, but I totally got it. I got the soul of it. I got the heart of it. I got the mind of it. I use the 7 habits regularly. I teach them and integrate them. What is end in mind other than what is winning? What is first things first other than where do you start operationally and executionally to translate the choices you make into, positive outcomes for your customers in the marketplace? So I'm a big believer in seek first to understand, and I made a lot of hay out of partnerships. A lot of hay out of partnerships, which is essentially win-win. And a lot of people think it's just smoke, it's just talk, it's just up here. But when you create real win-win or win-win-win-win, it's powerful. It's powerful. It's what's worked in our private-public partnerships. It's what worked for more than a decade now, 2 decades at Center City Development in Cincinnati. It's what's working here with Bayfront Park Conservancy 9 years into the first ever private-public partnership with the city of Sarasota. So I learned a lot from Stephen Covey. I admire what you guys do. And I believe playing to win is useful and doable by individual managers and leaders. What you teach, train, and mentor is useful and doable. And that's the kind of stuff I like.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate the enthusiasm and the adoption of the 7 habits over the years. I agree. It's a lot of the foundational source material that we all kind of embody and try to live our lives with. So thank you so much. It's a great conversation today. I learned a ton. We appreciate your time and your insights. And I'm sure our listeners will as well.
It's great to meet you, Will. I enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all of our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did, and we hope you join us next week for another episode of FranklinCovey on Leadership.